Halo Fishmania, kali ini kita akan membahas tentang obesitas dan awal mulai terjadinya obesitas, dan ternyata sudah ada solusinya sejak 150 tahun yang lalu. Yuk, ini dijelaskan di dalam video oleh Dr. Jason Fang ini, ahli spesialis ginjal. Ya, bagi yang penasaran apa sih solusinya, dan ternyata sederhana solusinya ya. Yuk, tonton terus dalam video ini. Selamat datang di channel BINARAGA.NET. Bersama saya Joe Pemafu, biasa dipanggil nama Joe, JP atau JP, yang biasa membahas tentang nutrisi, latihan, dan produk seputar fitness. Jangan khawatir, video ini telah kita sematkan dalam teks bahasa Indonesia karena video ini dalam bahasa Inggris, jadi bisa ditonton lebih, Anda bisa memahaminya lebih baik ya.
So if you look back at the history of obesity medicine, what you can see is that people didn't really ever talk about calories. The first diet book was actually written by William Banting in 1863. It was called Letter on Corpulence, and what his strategy was to avoid all basically carbohydrates. What happened was that he was sort of gaining some weight. He was about 60 years old. So then he tried all the usual sorts of stuff. He tried to eat less, and it didn't really work. So then he tried to increase exercise. He went rowing on the Thames a lot, and he got more fit, but he actually didn't lose any weight. So he went to his surgeon at the time, and he said, well, you should avoid bread, and you should avoid sugar and all those sorts of things. So he cut them all out, and he did very well. So he published it, and that's generally acknowledged as sort of the first diet book. So these low carbohydrate diets, everybody calls them the fad. They're like 150 years old, right? It's not exactly a fad. It's more of a tradition. Then you get to William Osler, who wrote a sort of seminal textbook called The Principles and Practice of Medicine in 1907. And he's often called the father of modern medicine. He was a Canadian. And when you look at what he thought about obesity, he wrote a monograph of obesity, and what he said was that fatty foods are actually crucial because they increase satiety and decrease fat accumulation. So there's none of this eat low-fat foods. He is saying eat more fatty foods, right? And so he actually designed diets that featured beef, veal, mutton, and eggs. So that's what he thought about it. So again, this is more than 100 years ago. The sort of standard of medicine for the treatment of obesity, which acknowledged is not a big problem at the time, is to eat sort of less carbohydrates and more sort of protein and fat. By the 1960s, it's fairly common knowledge. So if you go to books like Dr. Spock's Baby Care, which is a very widespread book, what you see is that they say that rich dessert, the amount of plain starchy foods such as cereals, breads, and potatoes taken, is what determines how much weight they gain or lose. So basically these sort of starchy foods, sugary foods, that's what causes obesity. That's what they said. And in the British Journal of Nutrition, 1963, every woman knows that carbohydrate is fattening. So it's not sort of this, niche sort of, it's a really weird low-carb thing. It's sort of common knowledge. Nobody really disputes that. Nutritionists think that, hey, it's mostly these starchy foods and sugary foods that are causing the obesity crisis. If you were to ask your grandmother or so on, she wouldn't talk about calories, because of course they didn't really talk about calories back then. They would talk mostly about avoiding sweets and avoiding starchy food.
Semoga bermanfaat. Setuju Anda bahwa hidup ini adalah pilihan. Kita bebas memilih gaya hidup seperti apa, dan kita bebas memilih makanan yang kita konsumsi, tapi kita tidak bebas dari konsekuensinya. Ya, konsekuensi salah satunya adalah makanan gaya hidup yang buruk, dan makanan yang buruk menyebabkan tubuh kita obesitas. Ya. Dan memang kesehatan yang bukannya hal yang utama, tapi hal yang utama dalam hidup kita tidak bisa diraih tanpa kesehatan. Kita tidak mungkin membayar orang melakukan push up, pull up, squat, tetapi kita yang mendapatkan ototnya. Jadi kita yang harus melakukan kepada diri kita sendiri. Saya Joe Pompo bersama BINARAGA.NET. Kami mengajak Anda membangun generasi baru yang lebih cerdas, fit, dan tangguh. Di BINARAGA.NET, kami selalu percaya bahwa setiap orang pasti bisa memiliki tubuh yang ideal dan sehat. Dengan subscribe, like, dan share video ini, Anda turut membantu membangun Indonesia sehat dan kuat. Salam jelas fitness, saya JP.